Good day, everyone. It's Half Past Ridiculous, and we're seeking Essentio Mentium. Last week, what did we do last week, Carl? Basically all over the map, if I remember right.
Yeah, pretty much all over the place, and then finished up on the review, basically, of Clive, his conditional acceptance.
Yes.
Which, incidentally, was awesome.
Yes, it was. It was very, very well written. A very nice document. Didn't find any issues with it. Again, we touched on it before. Don't just cut and paste, please, please, please. That's going to get you in so much trouble. And that's partly what we're going to talk about today, is how to generate a sentence or a thought in words on a document that you're not going to get slapped by. And it may seem relatively easy. I know folks that they've got masters in English and literature and all of this sort of stuff. When they hear some of these concepts, they I've never thought of that. And this is why we're going to just touch on it today. Maybe not extreme detail, but we'll look at the basics, the core concepts behind this, what to look out for, what sort of things can get in the way, and why they get in the way. Did you have anything you want to bring up about that, Carl, as an opening?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we're looking at the distinction between the English language and what lawyers speak, which is typically, well, we refer to it as legalese. Because when you write a sentence, as John's pointed out, what you're saying in English might be one thing, but what you say in legalese is something else entirely. And that works the other way around, which is why we find ourselves in trouble, because what we read and what was meant are not the same thing. And unfortunately, we have a habit of using certain words that are used in both languages. They're used in English and they're used in legalese, but they don't have the same meaning. And that's, I think, pretty much what we want to go into and discuss, so that sentence structure and how you read and comprehend documents that are sent to you.
Well, yeah,
you're going to see it in a different light.
Definitely. Making a statement, particularly in writing, even more so in verbally, but doing it verbally, it's really difficult. Unless you're really, really good at it, you're going to trip up if you try to do this verbally. You need a lot of practice because it's so fast. It's hard to think that fast. But when you're writing a document, you can sit down and take days to write the document. You can take a day to write one sentence and get that sentence absolutely perfect. And just as I'm going to use a couple of examples, just as some basic core concepts. Now, you could write down, I was born June 6, 1927, whatever. That's a blanket statement. Now, what questions does that statement bring up? The first one that comes up for me is, how do you know? So, how can you write that statement so that question doesn't come up? And one is, I was born as I have been led to believe on June 7th, 1927. Okay, that eliminates that question. That also brings up another, when you add that little bit to it, it brings up another question. Well, who led you to believe that? So we expand the sentence a little bit more and add either the document that you read, as I have been led to believe on such and such a document, or as I have been led to believe by my parents. The point is to, when you need to make a statement, look at that statement and look at it from the perspective of what questions will this statement bring up, and what arguments, what assumptions. If there's a question involved in the statement, that statement is open to assumptions. Okay, so simply stating I was born such and such a date, the listener can make one or more of several assumptions with that. One is you're a bold-faced liar. One is you are being purposefully deceptive, because those are based on the fact that you don't know the day you were born. You only know what you've been told. No one that I know of, no one that I could even imagine has the faculties at the moment they draw breath to be able to decipher a calendar, or even comprehend the concept of time. So it is entirely reasonable to assume that you simply do not know firsthand knowledge. I was there, I experienced it the day of your birth. So when you make that assumption, or when you make that statement, one of the first assumptions you have to eliminate is that you are stating this as an empirical fact, because it's not. You don't know. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I was going to say an expansion of that initial sentence that you gave in my mind would go along the lines of, and again, we can break this one apart. But I was told by my mother, who stated she gave birth to me on 1st of July 1927. Expands what was said, but answers some of those questions, but can also bring in a couple of more in relation to mother and so on.
Yep. And typically the first time you find out about a birthday is they tell you about it. Oh, it's coming up. It's your birthday coming up, and it's all of this sort of stuff. And then over time, as people get older and older and older, they start seeing it on documentation. They start, they're asked, "What's the birthday at the school?" They're asked, "What's your birthday when you fill out a form?" Any of this stuff, and people don't realize that if you're filling out a form, if you're applying for something that requires a signature at the bottom of it, that signature is an oath. And you are making oath that the information on that is true and correct. And it usually says that, I affirm that the information provided is true and correct. If you give them a birth date, if you give them a date, a place of birth, you don't know. You're committing perjury right there, just by putting that on there. And if this is something they are demanding that you fill out, rather than something that you are seeking from them, then you have a recourse at that point. If it's something you're seeking from them, you either fill out the form or you don't get it. So learn to live without the services as much as you can, because you don't want to have their services if you don't absolutely have to have them. And I've lived outside of that system for better part of 15 years, and I don't miss a whole lot of it. The services, I don't need services provided at the point of a gun. Thank you. I'll get it elsewhere. Different things. It's not just the birth date. It's a different thing. One of my opening paragraphs of a document that I've written. It says, "I, John Carl, born of the family Anderson, a sovereign, living being in a common law jurisdiction, born as I have been led to believe in the city called Edmonton in the geographical region called Alberta, on or about the 7th day of the month of November of the year 1963 to blah, 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 blah." The point is, I don't know, so I have to make very clear that this is what I have been led to believe. And in order, they can't use that against me, because it's not a blanket statement. I'm not saying this is truth and fact. I'm simply swearing to, this is what I've been led to believe, which is totally reasonable. So it doesn't really matter what you're bringing up, what statement you're bringing up, whether it's a birthday, a birthplace, a family name, or even a note or an element of your understanding. If you make a blanket statement without having the first-hand knowledge, it's going to come back and bite you on the butt. Let's see if I got something else in here that... well, this is...
We usually find, though, John, of course, that if you're making any applications, typically, well, even if it's either way, you don't get yourself in trouble that they take action against you by stating this. But the very fact that you, in essence, have committed perjury during the application process, or you're taking on board the persona, will get you in trouble too.
Well,
could it come back and bite you in the ass because you used hearsay to fill out a form? These days, probably not, but you never know what's going to happen in the future. And if there is such a thing as an energetic process, the fact that you've been lying all these years, is that going to have an effect as well?
Well, to a point, yes. But this is more ensuring the distinction between the flesh and the fiction. And like whenever they're looking for ID, whenever they're looking for a name and a birth date, Carl, you did this throughout your career, right? Anytime you had to act against or act on anyone, you needed a name and a birth date. It's the birth date that they use to allow the assumption that you are acting as the fiction. And this is why they don't prosecute you for putting, false information on these forms and swearing to it, because they allow that to happen so they can assume they're dealing with the fiction. If you do not want to deal as the fiction at all, then you can't provide that information in any way, shape, or form. And if you're seeking their services, then you're pretty much sunk. You can't really mess with their process. Carl's example with his passport is a good one about that. It was a simple thing. All he did was adjust his signature slightly, and they refused to accept that because they don't care. That if you don't follow their rules, you just don't get your passport. You don't get to travel. If it doesn't matter and you don't need a passport, don't fill out the form. If they are seeking your services, if they're saying you have to fill out this form and it's something you don't want in the first place, then I would fill it out as a living flesh human being with the proper information. Birth date, unknown, because I don't know. And then when I sign the bottom of it, I'm telling the truth because I do not have firsthand knowledge of that. Birthplace, unknown, because I do not have firsthand knowledge of that. And in that way, kind of messes with their system, and they can't really act because they can only act on the fiction. And this came up a couple of times when we were discussing this about the legal process and what's involved in the legal process and the fraud, the basic fraud of it, which is from another perspective, not really fraud. It's deceptive acts and practices, certainly. But if a legal fiction is charging you, they're charging a legal fiction. They're not charging the flesh and blood man. They make you believe that you are that or that legal fiction. And that's why they get away with it. It's because you consent to it. You allow it to happen. You don't bring it up and say, look, I'm not a legal fiction. I'm not a surety to a fiction. I didn't create it. What the hell's going on here? Nobody brings this up. Nobody questions those little details. And that's why they get away with this stuff. And the forms are the same way. So if they are seeking your services, if they're saying you are obligated to sign this form, make sure that everything you put on that form is absolutely true and correct. Because if it is absolutely true and correct, that form is worthless to them. They can't do anything with it because they can't create a joinder to the fiction with it. And, little things, writing P-E-R, period, or V.C before your signature, you're signing as agent of the fiction. And you're creating the distinction there. Sometimes you can get away with this stuff. They don't see it. Sometimes it doesn't work. I know some people who have done that. They had to renew a driver's license, and they signed as agent of the fiction, and it got through. And all of a sudden, when the cop sees that, comes back with a ticket, and it goes, "Well, wait a minute. Why is this here? This isn't my ticket. I'm simply the agent. I'm not the surety to this. Look at the signature." And they turn white, and everything just falls apart at that point. Not always, obviously, but most of the time, you can definitely cause some issues with that, and they'll do all kinds of things. They'll jump through hoops trying to make this go away because they don't want it to happen. But with the documents, again, I'm looking through this one document.
Well, documentation, John, while you're just looking through there, any information that we put down in the document, anything that we feel or believe is true and factual, you can usually find it isn't. I mean, we've just spoken about the name. Yep. It's not our name. It was something that was given to us. And in the case of an all caps or a fiction, it isn't even owned by us. It was created by the state, as well as Clive just put in the chat box there, as the straw man, the typical word that's used to indicate the person that's the mask for the flesh and blood man or woman. Secondly, the date of birth. It's hearsay. We don't know when we were born, the date or where. That's another one. And even the address, your current address, that one is another that'll trip most people up, because every time you're using a postcode or a zip code or a street type address, it's part of a state or a province, which in itself is a fiction. So how can you reside or live or exist inside that fiction? So simply putting the address is another one that trips people up, because you're not actually on the land when you use that. You're describing a fiction, a fictional place. Which is something that I think gets discussed as well in some of the documentation and some of the sites you can find online, especially in the States, because they simply have a definition. It works well with Canada too, because we have the provinces. They have their own governments, their own constitutions in some cases, but then of course they have the federal level above all of it. So, there's a lot that we can look into. And if we go further, each part of a form that we're filling in, you're stepping on a landmine potentially by any of the information that you put in there and you write in there, simply because you don't understand what it is that's being asked of you. And this question again then is whether we're filling the form in for an application or whether they're coming to us and say, you have to fill this in.
Yeah, things like
responses are different.
Things like a mail address. There's a pretty simple way to get around that. You put to JCA care of, and then the fictional name. And this comes into a concept that Rob Menard brought up, in that the legal fiction, this straw man, can be a very useful tool. And that's what it is. It's a tool. It's a raincoat. But you need to know when to take the raincoat off and how to take the raincoat off, how to create that distinction. And it's actually pretty easy once you figure out, once you get in your head, once you get clear that there are two separate entities. One is heavily regulated, one is not. The one is viewed as property, one is not. So it is possible, and actually in most cases pretty easy to use that fiction, use that straw man as a tool. So, you know, for mail, to John, care of John Carl Anderson, such and such an address, creates that distinction. Because it, you know, you're showing there are two separate entities. The fiction who occupies this address, and the living flesh who is associated with that. Not, you know, depending upon what association you're going to accept. Most of the time they try to associate you as surety to it, but it wasn't, you didn't create it. You didn't cause it to exist, so you can't be surety to it unless you agree to it. You can't. You're not responsible. You know, I didn't create Walmart. I'm not responsible for Walmart's debts. I am not Walmart surety. The same thing with the government. I didn't create this corporate government. I am not responsible for its debts. There is a named surety to that. And typically, the surety is the one who created that fiction, which is, you know, one of the things. It comes up a number of places. There was where did that go? It's I downloaded it as a picture because it wasn't actually a document. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Probably not.
Yeah, well, while you're searching, yeah, I'll just kind of fill in the space a little bit. The whole concept of what it is that we want to do is all about this. Is all about the comprehension of language, the comprehension of forms, the comprehension of your status, and how to make it that much easier for you to probably exist the way we're supposed to, because this concept of, as Rob Bernard pointed out, of the person, the straw man being a raincoat, something that we can, you know, take off and put back on as needed, is realistically, I believe, how we are supposed to function in this society.
Yes.
We are supposed to be able to work in commerce when and if we need to, and then remove ourselves from that area and exist as a private man or woman who just wants to get on with their life. And at such point that we have to go back into commerce again, we put the raincoat back on and we exist, and we do what we need to do. Unfortunately, what's happened over the years, and this has taken a very, very long time to happen, the concept of the man and the woman, the free person, sorry, the free human man, woman being, has been taken over, has been ignored to some extent, and the overcoat is now a skin. It's almost permanently added to us, and that we have been coerced, let's say, by practices that you could say is fraud, but to some extent we agree. So by our agreement, it takes away some of the illegality as far as they're concerned. So this commercial strawman person is now us 24/7. And because of what we do on a daily basis, by filling in forms and signing our signatures to certain things, and applying and registering all of these things that we do on a daily basis, that we do because that's what everybody does, will and does get us into trouble. And unfortunately, very few people question the processes that are taking place. We and many others like us have questioned the process and continue to question that process. Sometimes we get answers. Most times we don't, because the people who set this system up don't tell the people that work within the system why it's done this way. So even the people working in the system are just you and I. Same Joe Blow who, you know, it might be your brother or sister, and they happen to work in the corporations that are enforcing these controls, these straw man and persons upon you when they shouldn't. So literally what we're doing is putting this information for you guys so that you can get that, you can understand it. Again, there's another word, understand, comprehend, so that you can better exist. And potentially you can, to some extent, start to go back to the way we should do, where we have a raincoat that we can take on and off, and we can act in commerce, or we can act as the private man or woman. And that's what we need to go back to. Government itself and the system in place is, if you look at it, is actually a mastery as far as design and implementation. Unfortunately, it's been taken over by the idiots and the criminals. Well, if it was used properly, then we would have a very, I think we would have a very good lifestyle. We would have a very good system of society. It's just unfortunate that things have got completely out of hand because of our ignorance, forced ignorance, but nonetheless ignorance.
Well, if the system was used as it was designed correctly, there would be no homelessness, there would be no hunger, people wouldn't be dying of diseases, there wouldn't be this manufactured system of lack. Profit wouldn't happen. And this is why that's really complex. Getting into the financial aspects of this, it's really, really complicated. But essentially, there's no need for money. There's no need for this this medium of exchange except in the private. There's no need for public funds, because all you have to do is accept the bill, accept for value, sign it, it's done. Because we are the value. We are the creator of this, of all of the funds. That's where the funds come from, is us. Not the government, not the IMF. That's where the accounting comes from. But the actual value that runs the country comes from the people. And all that's required for that is a signature. It's very simple. But once you start digging through it and you get into the rules and the regulations and the convoluted little spider webs that they've got this created so nobody can understand it, it'll drive you nuts trying to figure it out. There are a number of people who have figured it out, but because if that does work, there is no profit, the folks who are running this show don't want that to happen, because all of a sudden they're on equal footing with everybody else. And they lose their advantage. A lot of this stuff,
they're as poor as the rest of us,
or as abundant as the rest of us, because that's what the whole system was built around, was a unlimited abundance. And that doesn't mean you can go and have 15 cars and 7 houses and 12 swimming pools. I mean, you can if you want, but that's many cultures in this around the world would consider that to be a mental illness. Which basically it is. Why not?
This is about what you need. This is about what you need to survive to what you want.
Exactly.
What you want is about greed. What you need is just about realistically having an abundant lifestyle that allows you to do what you want to do, and exist within the system and still provide into the system. Because generally, I think that's what most people do. People are generally good and giving.
Yep.
Generally.
Yep. And, you know, most people, we're getting totally off topic here, but most people, if they have what they require, if they have a comfortable place to sleep, reasonably decent nutrition, you know, they've got electricity, they've got their basic needs covered, they are going to seek ways to improve their community. They're going to become artists. They're going to become teachers. They're going to share their gifts, their talents. And when you take the concept of profit out of the equation, the entire reason for getting up in the morning changes. And you do so to make everybody else's life better, because you know, and we've seen this in many cultures that we call primitive, that if you serve the community, everybody, including yourself, benefits from it. And this is basically an inviolate law of nature. It always works out that way. But, you know, folks don't get it. Anyway, this is like way off topic, but that's okay.
No, it wasn't. It was just a sidebar, Bobby.
Yeah, well, I didn't find the what I was looking for. But it was,
dear.
You know, it was basically just a little blurb about, you know, how to deal with court. And one of the elements it brought up was create the distinction. Make sure that you create the distinction between the flesh and the fiction, because they are two completely separate entities. One is public, one is private. And there are two systems running simultaneously. There's a public side and a private side. And, you know, anybody who works in finance will tell you that. Anyone who works in law, if you can get them to talk, will tell you that. Typically, living flesh lives in the private. You make private contracts. Carl and I have a private contract to do the show. We have mutually agreed to do this and talk about this and get along for the most part. We're doing pretty good. The public,
I think so.
The public has nothing to do with this show. I mean, the public entities, who are supposed to be trustees, not controllers or not owners, really, they can't step into this private contract between Carl and myself and say, no, you can't do it that way, you have to do it this way, because they have no jurisdiction within the private. Ensuring you make that distinction puts you on, you know, you can see the path at that point. I was going to say it puts you on a level playing field, but it doesn't. It actually tips the playing field big time. Completely takes the you know, the hockey bat to the chessboard, and but it allows you to see the path ahead. Now, in the public, there are certain duties and responsibilities that are there. Now, I'm not talking about the public as we typically understand it, whereas you go to a public park, you don't just pee on the trees and throw your trash everywhere. But more the regulation of activity within the public system. Things like driver's licenses. On the roads, there are two systems running simultaneously. It's a public system and a private system. The public system has the trustee relationship of the roads. It's the public entities or the public trustees' responsibility to ensure the roads are safe, well maintained, lit when they need to be lit, the signs are there, all of this stuff. Also, to protect the common law public, just general Joe average, who is the actual owner of the roads, that their resources are not being used for nefarious purposes, for private profit, this is the reason why we have licensing, is for people who use the roads, use the public resources for private gain. If you have a public space in your town and somebody wants to hold a concert, they can't just go and set up a big stage and invite 10,000 people and fill the park up, and because it belongs to the people. They can't close the park because it belongs to everybody. And it's what would be called, I mean, trying to use the word public in the two senses here is very difficult, and I don't really know the right words to use. So I'm sort of stuck because the English language is just not sufficient for this, which is probably why they invented law.
Yeah, I've tried to split it a little bit by referring to people, but even people doesn't quite cut it.
No.
Because the distinction that we're trying to make is that in that analogy you were using there, John, the public park, they could have a concert there that's even set up by the local municipal township, who would be typically the overseers of the public property. And if it was a free concert, then that would be still within the public. If it was a private concert and you went in there as the band and the manager of the band and took over the park for a private purpose in a public park, then that would be something completely different.
Yes, you would require the permission of the public.
Yeah.
And it's this concept that came up to me a couple of days ago when I was thinking about this. And if you're a soccer mom taking your kids to soccer, nobody's going to say no, right? They're just say, well, whatever, go, take your kids, be safe. Go. Nobody's going to complain. If you, I mean, this came up with like ambulance drivers. Nobody is going to complain that there's an ambulance on the road. An ambulance is a good thing. Which kind of obfuscates this issue a little bit because they are making their living on the road. So there's a gray area there. But some guy...
Technically, though, if healthcare was provided free, which it's supposed to be, then these guys who are operating within ambulances that may well be paid from public funds that we may provide to the local municipal governments for the purposes of providing the finance to provide these public amenities and such, then that's a slightly different matter, I think. If it was a private person or a private company ambulance that was operating on the public road, then that again would be a completely different matter, and that would very definitely come under the terms of the commerce and making a private living on public roads.
That's right. And in the example of the ambulance driver or the fire truck guy, or even the police, they, because of the extreme stress situations that they're in and their occasional need to really exceed what would be considered reasonable at the time, then a higher standard would be necessary for them to be held to. So yes, I can see that, like this, when you're looking at emergency services, there's a whole bunch of different things to look at there. When you're looking at a taxi driver, right? Got some guy, okay, I'm going to be a taxi driver. He paints his car yellow. He sticks a white light on the roof and goes and drives around and picks people up and they pay him. He's not getting his profit from public funds. He's not acting as a public utility. He's acting as a private utility. So he's actually stealing from the public by using the public resources for private gain. And this is where that really comes into play, where it becomes really clear why he would need permission to do that. Now, if you're in a small town, say there's 1,000 people in the town, you want to have a taxi, you write a letter, 1,000 letters, and you put them in everybody's mailbox, and everybody says, yeah, fine, whatever, I don't care. Then he's got permission from the public. He's got permission from the owners of the area to do what he needs to do what he's going to do. Now, he can't leave that area. He can't go and ply his trade outside of the area that he's got permission with. But that's, one way to get around that. If the whole town, if the whole public says, fine, whatever, I don't care, then the public trustee really has nothing to say. They can't step in and go, well, we're not going to listen to the public. We're going to do it our way. So this ties into something we brought up, I think, second or third show, in that when we have the numbers, when we have enough people asking these questions, enough people looking at these things going, that doesn't make any sense, we need this fixed, then those who are supposedly or originally put in place as trustees must follow suit.
And technically, that is what our government is doing. Of the US and the UK and everywhere. Technically, the problem is that the lobbyists and the corporations and the people who control things are, in fact, the ones who are putting forward their ideas for their benefit rather than for the public's benefit. And that is why things have really gotten out of control as far as the public and the people are concerned, in my view. Because,
there's a really good example of that. The GST vote. I can't remember what year it was. Late 90s, I think, or mid 90s. I can't remember exactly. Don't quote me on that. But I do remember very, very, very clearly that in the referendum, when they asked, "Will you accept the GST?" It was, what was there, 97, I believe, 97% said no. And they had a larger turnout than any election ever on this referendum.
Yeah.
And they totally ignored it. So they're not acting as trustees because the people are not holding their feet to the fire. Now, we need to do this.
What option do you have? You just say, well, it was the Liberals that did that. So they said, oh, well, the Liberals are the bad guys. Enforced this on us, so we put the Conservatives in place. Big whoopee-doo, it's the same.
It's the same.
We understand government now. It's the same people involved in the background. It's a different driver, but it's the same damn bus going to the same destination. Yep. If you want analogies, that's what it is.
Yep.
So, yeah. Frustrating as hell when politics gets involved.
Well, it's excuse me. Right now, the way things are, the so-called elected officials are nothing more than figureheads. They're the carrot. They have no actual power. They think they do. They lead us to believe they do, but it has nothing to do with anything. I went through this when I was doing my apprenticeship. I was having issues with my apprenticeship, so I went to the ombudsman. And basically, he sat there for a half an hour and listened to my story and essentially told me, well, too bad, so sad, go away. There's nothing I can do. And even though he was the regulatory body, and I had a legitimate claim. And, it said right in the rules, first year is this much, second year is this much, third year is this much. I was in my third year. I was getting paid first year wages, and which is absolutely illegal according to their legislation. And nobody would touch it because they are not in control. They don't have the power. However, if we were to assume, because they make assumptions all the time, that they are, and hold them accountable, so that if the public says, this is what we want, you're going to do it, and they don't do it, they go to jail, their controllers are not going to have any power anymore, because either the figureheads are not going to step up and there simply won't be a government, or the figureheads are going to go, wait a minute, I'm liable for this. I have to make sure that this works. I don't care if you're going to kill my kids. I have to make this work. I mean, Elections Canada talked to me years and years and years ago and asked me why I didn't vote. And I told him because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't change anything. And he goes, well, it's not going to change anything if you don't vote. I says, okay, here, let's have an agreement. As soon as you put none of the above on the ballot, I'll vote.
Yeah, that's my favorite term too.
And because there's no choice. You're given the illusion of a choice. That's all. There is no actual choice. You can't say, look, they're all idiots. I don't want any of them. And we also have to hold these people accountable. If you are inclined to go to a public meeting, say they've elected a new MLA in your riding, you can go and tell them, look, you don't represent me. You are not qualified to do so, which is basically what I do, because I will not be governed. If you want that person in there, then you bring up publicly in a loud and firm voice, if you do accept this position, you are personally liable for your actions, and get everybody in the riding to hold him liable for his actions. Probably not an easy thing to do right off the bat, but folks, places like Alaska, they do that sort of thing. And the one story about the cop who was just being a dick in this town, all of a sudden he couldn't get groceries, he couldn't buy gas. None of the businesses would serve him. None of the businesses would accept his business. He had to leave. He was held accountable for being a dick. We need to do the same thing with those who claim to be the leaders. They're not leaders. They're not supposed to be leaders. That's not their job.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're supposed to follow the people.
Yeah, I'm saying it's funny how the society has degenerated, and I say degenerated rather than the other way, simply because we always used to, and still do in many parts of Canada and the US, especially because the countries are so large, we exist in communities. And the same thing happens, in a similar way. If you want to be a dick in a community, then your life's going to be hell. But what's happened is that they've moved us all into cities where nobody knows anybody else. Nobody gives a shit about anybody else. And they've instigated all of this, what do they call it, bread and circus, to take our minds off things, and then instigated legislation that says they're leaders and they make the decisions and this is what's going to happen. And we've moved away from that mindset where community rules and we hold people accountable. And in this case, especially our representatives should be held accountable, but they're certainly not. The only accountability is when the next election comes up and we just vote the next idiot puppet in place.
Yep.
Well, those who vote, I don't register for voting. This is another contract that you have when you register to be a voter.
Yep.
And so on. We don't do any of those things.
Yeah, I bring this up because there are folks out there who either just getting started with this stuff, are in a position where they simply can't make that shift from working with primarily the public side to primarily the private side. There are folks out there who just, they're not in a position to be able to do that. And I recognize that. So what tools do they have? How can they actually make the distinction and use that public side as a raincoat when they need to, so that the services are still there? If you're disabled, you're on a disability pension, you're screwed. You can't step out of the system because you have to come up with some way to feed yourself. So you either need to find a community that will assist you in that fashion, which is basically the same thing, except you'll probably find really nice people that way and people who there's so many examples. I can't even pin them all down right now. I'm sure you guys can come up with dozens if you think about this. But
well, it's basically anything where the welfare state is taking, well, welfare and in quotes healthcare system has control of your existence.
Well, that's the most.
If you don't get money, then you die.
Yeah, that's the most in-your-face version of this. You know, but if you're in an earthquake zone, or you're in a place where they have forest fires a lot, I mean, there's a number of different examples that you can bring up. Now, the thing with the forest fires, yes, the community can take over, but they're not. You know, they're going to get a lot of resistance because the people who are supposed to have that job are not going to like it very much. But you know, smaller communities, the little villages, the little burgs on the outskirts of town and stuff, they understand this. They cooperate. They take care. You know, if there's a big ass pothole in the middle of the road, somebody is going to come along and fill it. It doesn't matter whether it's his job or not. There's a pothole and it's wrecking my car, so I'm going to fill it. And you usually wind up with a much better job anyway, because you know, yeah. I've seen some of the folks that get paid to do this, and they just do horrible work because they make sure that they have a job for tomorrow. But you know, yeah. The people who don't get paid for it, the people who are doing it because it needs to be done, are going to do it right the first time. And with the documentation, when you're writing your documents, when you're writing a letter, when you write a letter to your MLA. Or to the city or to the mayor or any of these things, make the distinctions. Make these distinctions. Make sure they understand that you are going to hold them liable for their decisions. And there is no. I mean, the what was it? The motu proprio just came out, I think 2013. The head of. I think
it came out before then. Actually, did.
Well, the head.
Law in 2013.
Oh, okay. The head of the corporation, the Pope, basically said, you know, look, guys, you're no longer able to hide behind this corporate veil. You are now personally liable for your actions. That got buried so fast. We tried to make it public knowledge really big, and it got buried. But it's absolutely true. These people are personally liable for what they do. They cannot simply write a letter, make a rule, cost thousands and thousands and thousands of people thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for nothing, without being able to, first of all, justify what they're doing, and second of all, answer if they screw up. Up until, I don't know when this got dissolved, I think it was sometime in the 70s, where public officials, public servants in Canada specifically, they had to have a signed oath to the public to serve the public, and they also had to have a public liability bond. They had to be bonded to indemnify the public for their misdeeds. If they screwed up, somebody seized their bond, they didn't have a job anymore. They were no longer a public official. That's no longer. That doesn't happen anymore. We do not have lawful public officials in this country anymore. There's no way other than in the private for anyone to hold these people accountable. So one of the things we kind of skirted on this a little bit last few shows, and that's the conditional acceptance is part of it. But when you write your documents, you write them to the individual, not the office. So if you're writing the mayor, it's Joe Blow acting as mayor. If you're writing a cop, it's, you know, Billy Thug acting as constable. Make the distinction. And this is, I think this is where a lot of this falls apart, is that people don't make that distinction. And it's not just...
Oh, I did on my paperwork to the bank, John. Within 30 days, my mortgage was sold on. They basically, the bank just gave it up. They wrote it off, as I found out later, within 30 days of them receiving my letter, because I sent it directly to the CEO and the CFO. I named them.
Yep. And when you start holding these people accountable, things change. Now, because there's not a lot of people doing this right now, what changes is usually they come and slap you down. And yes, that's going to happen. It's unfortunate. But until we get the numbers up, until we get more people doing this so that they simply can't slap everybody down, then we get a change. Then they're going to actually alter how they do things.
Hence the reason why we want to get this show to as many people as possible.
That's right.
So that we can bring this on board to as many people as possible so that they can act. And I say defend themselves because realistically they're being attacked by the system that's in place. And they don't really know how to defend themselves. Not all of them, anyway.
Well, I wouldn't call it the system that's in place because the system is awesome if it's used properly. They're being attacked by people who think they can hide behind the system. And and this is why that distinction is so important, is if you make it clear that the office doesn't mean anything, it's the person in the office that's going to go down for this, for whatever they do, for, you know, they're going to pay the fees or they're going to be liable for their actions. They're going to start thinking about what they're doing because they need to realize we need to enforce and make clear to these people that they simply don't have a shield to hide behind anymore. Now, how we do this,
voting them out on the next election is not holding them to account. No,
that's because they're going to get their pension, they're going to get everything, you know, they're going to get their golden parachute and all of this stuff. What I mean by holding them accountable is you take away their importance. You take away the things they feel are important. And for most of these guys, it's money. That's why the fee schedule is so powerful. You know, if they read through it, read through your documentation, and at the end of it, you've got your fee schedule, and your fee schedule is rational and reasonable and honest. They can't say, well, this is ridiculous. I'm not, you know, you can't justify any of this stuff. But if it's for unlawful acts, for harm, loss, damage, or fraud, you are more than within your rights to bill these people. And right now, all they understand is money. So take their money away. And nobody, they look at this and they go, you know, if I do this, it's going to cost me 10 grand. No, I'm not going to do this. They'll find a way out of it. They'll find some way not to be billed. But
well, that's it. We look at it, instead of being a core, you refer to it as a contract, because in essence, that's what you're doing.
That's right.
You're putting the elements of your contract with these personas, these corporations, and if you want to interact, or certainly if you want to interact with me, the private man, then these are the criteria and this is what it's going to cost you. This is a contract. This is not a notice of understanding, a claim of right. I mean, it is, but you can put right at the top of it, contract of my existence. It amounts to the same thing, you know? That's really what it is.
Contract of interaction, contract of service. You know, look at what you're doing, like specifically what you're doing. If it's you're seeking remedy for harm, that's a little different than trying to get them to not force you into doing something you don't want to do. I mean, we're starting to get into really kind of different colors of gray here, but those colors of gray are you know, in more or less important until we can get to the point where it's a little more simple. And at this point, because again, we don't have a lot of people doing this, we don't have a lot of people asking these questions or using these tools. We do have a vast array of gray shades that we're dealing with here. Once we have more people doing this, we're going to eliminate a lot of those gray shades, and it's going to get a lot simpler for everybody.
Of course. And it's better now than it was 10 years ago when we were doing it, John.
Oh, most definitely.
A hell of a lot more people now.
The conditional acceptance. We brought this up a couple of times. Now, the conditional acceptance, in really simple terms, what that does is provide lawful excuse. Now, how does it provide lawful excuse? If you have someone who says you have to do this, and you send a letter back going, oh, okay, well, if you say I have to do this, that's fine. But since I'm not a slave, this is my terms that I will do this under. And you send that back to them, and your terms are reasonable and honest and honorable. And they basically ignore it. Anybody that comes to you and go, well, you were told you have to do this, you say, well, yeah, I agreed to do it, but I'm waiting for them. Ball's in their court. They haven't agreed to allow me to do it. This is what the lawful excuse is. That's the mechanism that the conditional acceptance provides, or under how the conditional acceptance provides a lawful excuse. Is it gives you the ability to say, I didn't say no, I said yes. I'm waiting for them. That's why it's so powerful. That's why this is such a incredibly useful tool. But you have to be very careful how you write it. And this comes down to the original idea of the show: is how do you put your sentences together? How do you how do you word this in such a way that they are not going to be able to get around the issues and make assumptions and reinterpret your words? And we've touched on quantum syntax grammar. Incredibly powerful tool. Really complex when you first start on it, but once you understand how to mathematically create your sentences and create your statements, your prepositional format that you're going to be using, those statements cannot be misinterpreted. They mean exactly what they say. And what Carl brought up, where we're dealing with regular English and legalese, no longer applies, because those words mean those words and nothing more, nothing less. Punctuation. One of the greatest things that Facebook taught us is that people don't know how to write. I mean, I get emails that are half a page long, and there's not a bit of punctuation in the whole thing. And it takes me 2 hours of reading one long sentence, and it takes me 2 hours of going through it, trying to figure out what this guy is trying to say. Drives me nuts. We have lost the ability to be articulate. Now, again, I'm making a blanket statement. I apologize to those who are not in that position. But the vast majority of people don't know how to write a letter. They don't know how to write their thoughts out on paper and have them clear, and so that anybody who reads them can understand or comprehend completely what they're talking about. I struggle with this. Now, I have been labeled a wordsmith by numerous people because of the documentation that I've generated for people. But I got a long way to go too. I recognize that, and I make a lot of mistakes. There's a number of things that absolutely make me crazy. Using the wrong word. A very good friend of mine seems to love the word purported. Now, there's two concepts there. There's the concept of alleged, and there's the concept of purported. Almost the same thing, but they're not the same thing. Alleged means it could very well be a fact, we're just not sure. Purported means It's an alleged fact for the purpose of deception. And this friend of mine uses the word purported for pretty much everything. Now, I don't know whether she understands the difference between the two, but I'm going to bring it up to her sometime when I'm talking to her about it, because it makes me nuts. Again, I'm guilty of this too. I make some of these stupid mistakes, but typically, when I'm writing a document, when I'm putting something on paper that I want absolutely clear, absolutely, crystal clear, so it cannot be misinterpreted, I take the time. Take the time to go through the words, go through the dictionaries, look at your punctuation, make sure the commas are in the right place. There was a little joke going around Facebook for years now about helping Uncle Jack off a horse. Depending upon where you put your comma, it completely changes the sentence.
Yeah.
It's really important that we get this back, especially if you're going to use any sort of documentation. You got to learn how to write.
I think that full sentence was how to get Uncle Jack get off a horse, wasn't it?
Well, I'm sure everybody understands what I'm talking about, and they can see it in both ways, right? You can help your Uncle Jack off the horse,
yeah,
or the other one,
yeah.
And it all depends on where you put the comma. Completely changes the sentence. So read it. Have other people read it. I mean, I did that when I was learning how to write these documents. I would write something out. I'd make it as good as I can, and I'd give it to 3 or 4 of my friends and say, read this. Tell me if it's confusing to you. And almost every single time they come back and go, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. This is totally backwards. And that's the way you learn. That's the way you improve what you're doing, is by doing it. Anything requires practice. It doesn't matter whether it's writing a letter or playing a tuba. You got to do it, and you got to have feedback from it. Like if you played your tuba in a cave, nobody around, who's to say you're even any good, right? Because you're not getting any feedback. So, don't do this in a vacuum. Do this in groups. Please do it in groups. Teach in groups. Learn in groups, because you're going to get a much better education that way. You're going to learn, not everyone has the whole picture. I don't have the whole picture. Carl doesn't have the whole picture. Maybe between Carl and I, we've got a little bit more than each one of us has. But we also have to be able to articulate that between each other so that we can both grow. By sharing these ideas, by learning together, you get a broader perspective, a larger portion of this tapestry we call life clear, so that you can see what's going on. Oh man, boy, did we go off topic. That was fun.
Yeah, actually, if you want to look at the etymology of language and stuff, we talked about this on a previous show as well, where Bill Clinton, during his interviews or depositions for the inquiry, Monica Lewinsky type inquiry, when he said, it depends on what your definition of is.
Yep.
Something as simple as that. I mean, this is what we're talking about in respect to language and legalese, and how wordplay has become such an art form in many of these forms and letters that we get from authorities and corporations, and many of them are couched in ways that make you fearful, when they actually have no bite behind them, simply because of the language that's used.
Yes, words like,
to be careful.
Yeah, words like must and may. Must and may in law are synonymous. They're it's essentially the same word. It depends on the direction of liability. If they use the word must, if you really take apart that body of words that are using the word must, M-U-S-T, what you'll find is that is what has to happen for them to gain control. If they use the word may, it means they really don't care about control. You can do it or not. It doesn't really matter. But they're both choices. If they use the word shall, S-H-A-L-L, that is an imperative. Yet, be very careful about when you read that. If you read the word you shall do this, find out who you is, because they're probably not the one reading it. Typically, there's going to be a qualifier somewhere in that document that says that this only applies to certain groups or certain people or agents or something like that. I wish I could find it. If someone knows where this is, please post it. There is a clause in one of the acts of Canada that states that the acts only apply to agents and employees of the government. I know it's there. The people that told me about it, I trust them. I have actually seen it once, but I can't remember where it is. If somebody can remember where that is, put it in a chat, stick it in an email, get it out there so that we can find this again.
Is it not Section 32 of the Constitution, John?
It may very well.
Or 32.
It may very well be, but
yeah, I thought it was written into the Constitution itself that it actually only applies to the government and agents of the government, and I thought it was under section. I'll have a look, but I thought it was under Section 30 or 32 of the Constitution.
Okay.
I do know the one you just used there, shall. I used that to my benefit as well a few years ago, because I think I told you about it, was when I had to go into hospital to receive some treatment for kidney stones. And they sent me a statement, which I then promptly sent to the Ontario Hospital Insurance Plan down in Toronto, I believe it is, and told them to pay it. They didn't. They didn't actually pay it per se, but they did call me. They phoned me up not very long after receiving it, and I explained to them that the Act itself, it says the insurance manager or manager of the OHIP shall issue a card.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't in relation, you apply and he shall. It's basically, if you are in Ontario for more than 3 months, you are covered under the Ontario Hospital Insurance Plan, and the manager shall issue a card.
Yep.
So I said in my letter, I'm still waiting for the manager to issue my card, and I haven't received it yet. And can you send it to me? And oh, by the way, here's an open item that requires payment. So as it happens, they basically told me, well, with the insurance, get them to resubmit it under the existing number that I had, the old health card number, which had expired quite a number of years ago. And they said it'll be paid, and apparently they did, and I haven't heard a thing back from them since. But neither have I received my card. But at least I had a conversation and proved a point.
Yeah, I mean, if you in that specific instance, if you really wanted to be a pain in the butt, you could have told them, "Well, I'd be happy to resubmit, but it's going to cost you $1,000 because my time is valuable." I did this. You didn't
resubmitting though. It was the hospital.
Yeah, but they tried to put the onus on you to do the work.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Right, and this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about holding their feet to the fire. All of these supposed public officials are going to try to get you to make sure that the handcuffs are tight enough, and It's their job. I mean, if they fall down on the job, if they don't do what they're supposed to be doing, and then they try to get you to do their work for them so that they can look good, why shouldn't you be compensated for that? Why shouldn't they, as private individuals, compensate you for that? And who's a slave? I'm not a slave. Now, in some cases, yeah, you just do it because it's simpler and it's convenient, it's easy, you're going to benefit from it anyway. But in a lot of cases, bill them. Let them know. But you can't just send them a bill. You have to let them know, this is a billable thing. I'm not a slave. If you want me to do this, it's going to cost you this much. Give them a heads up, because that's the honorable thing to do. I mean, if somebody comes along and you call a plumber and he walks into your house and fixes your sink, and he doesn't give you an example, or you don't ask for what's the fee going to be, he can bill you $20,000 for tightening a nut under your sink. And too bad. I mean, in reality, because you didn't question it, you're liable for it. And it's the same way with them. If they say, well, you're going to do this job, you can bill them for whatever you want, basically. But be honorable about it. Give them a heads up. Like, don't play their game unless you absolutely have to. Do it.
Don't charge them $500,000 for an hour. That's ridiculous too.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be reasonable. It has to be, relatively reasonable. Now, if you look through my fee schedule, some of the fees you would say were, relatively unreasonable. Now, let me bring that up. Okay. Where does it start off? Okay, it starts off at $500 per hour for being questioned, interrogated, or in any way detained, harassed, or otherwise regulated without my express written and notarized consent. And from that point, it starts going up. The next one is $5,000 per hour if I'm held, handcuffed, transported, incarcerated, or subjected to any adjudication process without my express written and notarized consent. And it goes up from there. It will include an additional $50,000 per hour, or portion thereof, in the event I'm held in a vehicle, cell, room, or other space with free access to egress restricted by any threat of harm, type of lock or device designed or modified for that purpose, or by its physical location or proximity to the ground against my will without my express written and notarized consent. And it goes up from there, and will include $1 million for every centimeter of length or square centimeter of area or part thereof of third-party verifiable marks on my body from any holding device, handcuff, nylon strap, hand, boot, shoe, glove, weapon, or any other surface or item caused by, and this is the important one, or by neglect or design allowed to be caused by the actions of any peace or police officer, government principal, employee, agent, or justice system participants measured and assessed by competent medical practitioners of my choosing or emergency medical technicians without delay. If they don't want to be billed, first of all, don't try to arrest me, okay? Unless I've caused, this is for unlawful offenses, okay, on their part. If it's a lawful thing, I'll answer for it. If I caused harm, loss, damage, or used fraud in a contract, I will answer for it, guaranteed. Because I'm an honorable human being. I live under common law. I live by those rules. This is for unlawful action, where they do not have a clear, articulatable right to hold me accountable for anything. Okay, that's what the fee schedule is about. So if they don't want the $500 an hour, don't even talk to me. If you talk to me, it's going to cost you $500 an hour. If it goes past that, then the fees go up. Right? So they always have a choice to walk away. They always have a choice to back off and say, no, I'm not going to play. I don't want to be billed. I'm not going to do this. You have to give them a way out. You can't force them to pay you unless you have a reason, unless you've done services, unless you've provided them with a service or some definable property. Now, that could be a right. Rights are your property. Someone infringes on your rights, they're committing theft. Or trespass. I mean, you could look at it either way. And I prefer to look at it as my rights, my claimed rights are my property. And you have no authority to take my property without lawful cause. And again, lawful cause, I caused harm, loss, damage, or fraud. And I will, you know, I keep saying over and over and over, I will answer for those things. Because I go out of my way not to do those things. Because I don't want them done to me. So I'm not going to do them to anybody else. And I will give up a lot so that I don't cause harm, loss, damage, or fraud. I'm happy to do that. I mean, it goes up even $1 million for each occurrence for any aggravating of pre-existing conditions, permanent injury, scar, condition, or abnormality to my body or psyche by the action or the result of the action or lack of action by neglect or design of any police or peace or police officers, government principals, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Additional fees to be determined on a case-by-case basis with a minimum of $750 per order or demand. These fees are non-negotiable and payable on demand. Additional $50 per day penalty will be levied for late payments as well as any costs incurred to secure payments. So they know exactly what I will bill them for. Precisely. There's no question at all. And for the most part, if they can justify their actions, they won't get billed. Because if it's a lawful action on their part, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So when you're making up your bills, when you're building a fee schedule, make sure you cover all the bases. And you know, because if like the one about damage, if you just said for any length or centimeter or square centimeter of area or part thereof, a third-party verifiable marks on my body from any holding device, handcuff, weapon, or other surface or item. It leaves it open. They're going to find a loophole that they can beat you with something that's not on your list. Right?
Yeah.
So consider that when you're writing this stuff too. That in that occurrence, in that specific situation, where are they going to find a loophole? Where are they going to find an omission that you missed that they can get away with? This comes to, you know, this does tie in with writing, you know, the way we write our documents and the way we wrap our or put our sentences together. It's the thinking process around choosing the right words within that sentence or within that document. The one about aggravation of pre-existing conditions, permanent injury, scar, condition, or abnormality, if I didn't add psyche, then they could treat my body really well, but give me all kinds of hypnosis and other crap and screw my mind up and not be billed. So I had to add that to it, right?
Yeah.
So the mind games, okay, that covers the mind games, so they can't play the mind games anymore. Consider how you're going to protect yourself from this. And again, be reasonable. Start small, work your way up. As the conditions or as the services become more onerous, the fees become higher. And some of the folks, like one lady in Squamish, I'm not going to name her because she's actually a really nice lady and I have nothing against her, but I found when I read her fee schedule, I laughed because it was absolutely unenforceable. It was in the billions of dollars, which was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it was so beyond reasonable that it was a joke, in truth. So be reasonable with your fees. I mean, $1 million for damage. If they break my arm, it's going to cost them $1 million. I don't find that unreasonable because they have the choice not to break my arm. If they want to come and talk to me, $500 an hour. How many lawyers get paid $500 an hour? You know,
quite a few.
Exactly. I mean, that's not an unreasonable fee. It's a pretty steep fee, certainly, but it's not outside of the realm of what's already out there, what's already available.
Yeah.
Now,
I think that's obviously what does make it reasonable. Something that is not onerous on your part or theirs to accept it. Now, I just wanted to ask you as well, in relation to this, I think have many copies, because you might be able to supply this, and you might even label it as, you know, notice to the agent and notice to principal and so on, if you're going to give it to the chief of police. But technically speaking, you should really have a copy with you, and then if, you know, a cop wants to try and contract with you in this way, give him a copy right there and then. Before you continue, read this.
Yep. And
obviously don't make your contract and fee schedule read it. It has to be fairly straightforward, I think. Very quick, very easy to understand, and very concise, which is also part of the writing process. And it also makes it easier for the other party to take notice of, to comprehend it, and under the legal term, understand it.
Yeah. I mean, you know, just prior to the actual listing of my fee schedule is a paragraph that says, I claim the right to activate my fee schedule against any peace or police officers, government principals, employees, agents, or justice system participants in the event of a breach of my rights as claimed herein, through an act, order, or demand at my discretion. And so they, you know, we know who's involved in this. Like Joe Average, I'm probably not going to activate my fee schedule against my neighbor. I mean, I'm going to go and talk to my neighbor and go, look, guy, you're just being unreasonable. Let's work something out. We have to live together. We're side by side. Let's deal with this. But this is primarily to the people who think they are in control. And the point of this, I mean, this whole document is 11 pages, 4,636 words, lets them know I do not accept your claim of authority, except under very specific conditions. Because otherwise, it's just gonna be a blanket thing. And, you know, then we have tyrants and warlords, and you have absolutely no accountability, and they can do whatever they bloody well please, and we're all slaves. That's why I did this.
It's getting that way.
Well, they'd certainly like to have it that way. And
yeah, exactly.
You know, so by educating yourself, by letting them know, I'm not just going to roll over and die. You can jump up and down. You can wave a gun in my face. It doesn't matter. I am not going to play the game. And if you do force me to play the game, here's my contract. Here's what you are agreeing to do. So either you agree to pay my fees, you agree to follow these rules, follow this contract, honor this contract that you are. It's because it's a what is the actual word for it? Performance contract. If you perform, you're liable for the contract. So you can either do that and be liable, or leave me alone, and I won't bother you.
Yeah. Does it state in there, John, as well, that the office does not protect you? That your actions as a man or woman will bring this contract into force? To that effect, basically. And actually, the next question as well, and I'm sure everybody else would like to know, of course, the fee schedule is great, and you can hand it out to anybody who is basically trying to overstep their bounds and come into your life. But the next step is, okay, they've infringed, they've spent an hour with you, questioning you over shit that you want nothing to do with, and have detained you in the process. So you now have a $3,500 invoice to give them. How do you go about enforcing it after the fact?
I claim that anyone, their agents or assignees, who interferes with my lawful activities after having been served this notice of this claim, and having been served notice of this claim, and who fails to properly dispute or make lawful counterclaim is breaking the law, cannot claim good faith or color of right, and that such transgressions may be dealt with in a properly convened court de jure. Now, a court de jure is a common law court. It's a people's court. It's where the community gets together, appoints someone to be the adjudicator to make sure that order is maintained. The facts are brought up and the community decides whether or not they're going to act. That is a properly convened court. Now, there's certain rules. That's very simplistic explanation of it, but that's basically what it is. It's a court of the people, not a court of law. Court of law is a legal system, and it's a complete, absolute gong show. If you've ever been to court and you have any inkling of how these things are supposed to work out, it's obvious right off the bat, this is a complete gong show. They don't even follow their own rules. Whereas a people's court is a common law court where the people, the community decides what's right and wrong. And it's right in the document that if they accept and they don't make a proper counterclaim who failed to dispute or discuss or make lawful counterclaim, they're liable for what's in the document. It's this because this is a contract. And it's an honorable, honest, reasonable contract. I'm basically saying the whole document, all 11 pages, basically say, look, I understand you do not actually have authority. It's all smoke and mirrors. I don't want to play. Leave me alone. I'm not going to hurt anybody. I am going to act under this body of law, these words, which is the common law. Very simple, very basic, very straightforward. If I breach that, I'll answer for it. Other than that, leave me alone. That's what this document is basically saying, which is a completely reasonable thing to do. I mean, if you're walking down the street minding your own business, your neighbors have no cause to come out and bitch that you're walking down the street. Because you're not bothering anybody. You're just walking down the street. So, same thing everybody else does. And this is essentially what this document is saying, is I'm just simply going to live my life just like everybody else is supposed to. And I will do so without interference. And if you interfere, these are my conditions. This is what's going to happen. Enforcing it, yes, enforcing it can be a bit of a bear. But we have discovered through experimentation and through actually people enforcing their fee schedules with proper bills, correctly formed bills, that they do have power. Because it is a contract. And if it does wind up going to court, you go, look, hey, here's the contract, here's the paper trail. He received it, he knew everything, exactly what was going on. He performed the act. He's liable for the bill. And so far, every single one has been liable for the bill.
And actually, the guy turning around and throwing it inside, throwing it back at you, say, I don't agree with that, that's bullshit, is not terms for him to overrule.
No, that's not a proper dispute, because within the document is a note. This is what I will accept as a dispute. You have so many days. If you have a dispute on any point, it must be in specificity and particularity. I hate those words. They're so hard to say. And it must be, you must take liability for your dispute. You must actually put your balls on the table and sign this document under oath. Because otherwise they just go, yeah, it's crap. Go away. And which is that's not a counterclaim. That's not a lawful dispute of the document. They have to tell me why. I did this with a police officer from Saskatchewan, and I wish I could remember your name. If you're listening to this, by all means, please get a hold of me. I would really like to discuss where you went with this. If you learned anything from our interaction 15 years ago. But I sent him a copy, essentially this document that I've been taking excerpts from. And I asked him, I said, go through it. Tell me where I'm wrong. And he couldn't. It went on for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months, something like that. And he finally got back to me in the forums and says, I don't have time. I'm not going to do this anymore. He couldn't find anything wrong with the document. And I asked him, I said, here it is. Tell me where I'm wrong. I'm not going to hold you to anything. I want your opinion. I want your expertise on this. And he couldn't do it. And that's, when you're writing these, that's where you need to be. You need to be able to have everything in there you can back up and everything in there to be as correct as you can possibly make it. And I've got there's 54 points in my notice of understanding, and everything from, let me see, where's the beginning here? Everything from the first one. I understand, whereas I understand that a notice of understanding and intent and a claim of right hereinafter and NOUI/COR are ancient concepts and have a firm and binding foundation in law. Very first one. The second one, whereas I understand that a notice of understanding of intent and claim of right are initially offers for discussion of the subject matter, and whereas I understand that a refusal to discuss the specifics of the NOUI/COR has the effect of rendering them contract and thus binding the parties involved, their agents, successors, and assignees from that moment forward. First 3 points in the document are telling you, don't ignore it. This is
the contract.
It's important that you listen to this, because what's coming after this, you're going to be held liable for.
I noticed that you used the word understand there as well, John.
Yep. And I used it.
Which in that, is in the correct legal phraseology in that case.
That's right. I understand that the notice of understanding and claim of right are initially offers for discussion of the subject matter. I hold that as truth above me. I understand that a refusal to discuss this is binding, right? It's used in the correct terminology, because these are things that I hold as truth that I live under. That's why I use the word understanding. Not understanding in the term of concept or of comprehension, but understanding in the term of I hold these as authority, these points.
Or stand under, as it's otherwise known.
Yep. And you could have it in, whereas I stand under that a refusal to discuss the specifics of the, you could write it that way as well, which is a little clearer for most people to make that distinction, right? But I'm sending these to people who are essentially lawyers, so they know what the word means.
It's used in its legal terminology rather than the standard English language.
Yep.
Usage.
I have a point in here that says that blanket statement denying the notice of understanding claim of right is insufficient to dispute the points. I got a point in the judge in a court is bound on record to his oath, cannot interpret law. A summons is only an offer. That an offer for discussion and negotiation must be presented first before any court or adjudication can take place. Statute judgments have an administrative remedy, which you can settle by a bill. The one that I really like is, I understand that Canada is a nation founded on the belief of the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law, and this defined hierarchy with God at the top and number 2 position claimed by no one, which I immediately claim. So in my country, the hierarchy is God, me, and then the government. And
which
I
is
also,
what it says in the Constitution, as you said.
That's right. And
although, I just wanted to point out that what we brought up, Section 32, and I don't know if you picked it up in the chat. I didn't mention it earlier, but I did find that that Section 32 that relates to the Constitution, that also states that it is binding on the government, agents of the government, and so forth.
Okay. Awesome.
So it's slightly up that list a little bit. I know you were in the swing of searching for other stuff before we moved on. But yeah, it's there. And I'm not sure if I found it in anything else, but typically the Constitution is the supreme law of Canada, and any other law that is not in, what the hell do they call it now? I won't say agreement, but anything that is the attempt to overrule by other laws the elements of the Charter, then it's unenforceable and not binding and void.
Yeah. So, one mistake a lot of people make. The Constitution is not your law. It's not the law of the people. It's the limits of government. That's what the Constitution is. It's the limits of the authority of the government. And you have
to... US and Canadian, at least.
Everywhere.
Many others as well. Yeah.
It's because it's a corporation. They have their mandate. And that's what the Constitution is basically the limits of the mandate of that corporation. How far can they go? And that's the only purpose of that document. If you try to claim rights under Constitution, you're doing it wrong. You use the Constitution to limit the rights of the government.
Yeah, and that's typically why if you try and stand up start screaming about your rights under the Constitution, typically the judge will turn around to you and say, you mention the Constitution one more time and I'll hold you in contempt of court and have you arrested.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to use rights that you're not a party to.
That's right. You're trying to usurp or trespass on the rights of another. And that'll get you slapped really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, my notice of understanding, I talk about the straw man. Bring out my understanding of the straw man, that it is a fictitious entity which has been provided as a tool that I am not liable for because I didn't create it. Talked about the birth certificate, where the birth certificate, right on the back of it, it says revenue receipt, treasury use only. And we've seen hundreds of examples of these. I think, Carl, I think you posted one, a photo of a birth certificate in the chat, always up.
Actually, I don't think it was me. I think it was, I forget who it was now, but yeah, there was a chat further back. Literally said, as you mentioned there, treasury receipt.
Yep.
I don't think it ever had that on the English birth certificates, but it does have on it, this is not evidence of identity, which is another blinding signal to you as well.
That's as far as I understand, Carl, that's Britain only. So you'll have to, if you can talk to some of your buddies in Britain, if they're there anymore, see if you can get a photocopy of that. They can wipe out their information. I don't care about their personal information. I'm interested in the form itself.
I'll have to have a look at mine. But I do remember, I've seen it. I've seen it myself.
Yep. I touch on the birth certificate, the what do they call it? The series number on the back. It's either red or green. I haven't seen any other colors besides red or green. I touch on the concept that it's a evidence of a stock certificate in the Corporation of Canada, which is actually a stock certificate in the value of the country, not the value of the corporation, because the corporation stole all the value of the country. That the Minister of Finance currently acts as the fiduciary, that I, if I choose, can assume the role of fiduciary, which I don't really want to do, but I want to make it clear that it's a choice, because I am in control of that, and I assign, as the beneficiary, I assign the people that I want to work on that. That the legal fiction is a soulless commercial entity, and without my energy, the legal fiction cannot operate. The legislated acts of Canada are populated by statutes. The statute is defined as a rule of a society that was given the force of law, and not by definition a law. Now, you really have to look at that statement really carefully. The rule of a society. Okay? In law, a society is a named thing. It's not a general overall blanket statement meaning all the people in an area. A society, it has to have a name, it has to have a charter, there's a whole bunch of things it has to have. So it's very important that you understand how that works if you're going to use this. And in law, a society is defined as a group of individuals gathered together by mutual consent to deliberate, determine, and act for a common goal. And because it is by mutual consent, there is no obligation to consent to association with any society. And it is also lawful to revoke consent to association with any society. And I understand that by revoking consent to association with any society, that the statutes of that society no longer apply. Which nobody liked that one. That made a whole lot of people turn white when they read that.
Yeah, because that's very specific.
It's very specific. Touched on identification.
Sorry, John.
Go ahead.
Can you say that bit again? I missed it.
About society?
Yeah, no, the other bit. After society, you came up with a little sentence.
Okay, well, one of the points is there's no obligation to consent to association with any society, because it's all about consent. You can't be part of the SPCA unless you agree to be.
Okay, thank you. Got that.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
And if they say, well, you are a part of the SPCA and you don't want to be, you go, no, I don't consent to be part of your society, and you're not, because it's by mutual consent.
Yeah, I've got my birth certificate here if you want me to read that bit about not evidence.
Ooh, that's a loud dog. Were you gonna post that in the chat?
Well, I've got no scan of it.
Oh, okay.
I've got no scanner.
Okay, no worries.
But what it says on mine is warning. A certificate is not evidence of identity, and it's all in uppercase, so it's all in glosser. So is it really there?
Yeah, I did touch on that. Where is that? Share owners, stock certificate, dividends, going to force of law. I understand that the certificate of birth is not identification of the flesh and blood being, as that information is hearsay and the individual cannot attest to its validity. And all other documents claimed to be identification based on the information on that certificate of birth are invalid due to this hearsay.
Okay.
Which is every government document that they actually get you to apply for.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not yours.
These documents considered identification are in fact identifying a corporate entity created without the individual's knowledge or consent and have no direct association to that individual. And it is lawful to refuse joinder with any corporate entity, and that joinder cannot be assumed without the consent of the parties affected.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could go into it a lot more detail, but those 3 points are pretty much sufficient to bring the point across that I'm not going to play the game.
It's very similar to mine.
Yep. Acts, statutes, and bylaws that are created by a society or a corporation are contractual and applicable only to those that are acting within that society or corporation. Canada is defined, believe it or not. This is actually right out of the Interpretation Act, Section 51, subsection 1. For greater certainty, Canada is defined as, for greater certainty, includes the internal waters of Canada and the territorial seas of Canada. It says nothing about the land. Yeah. Now, we know...
Because then we have the understanding of what includes actually means.
That's right. When they're using includes with an S in law, it is limited. It's a limiting thing. It's limited only to that list. Okay.
Yeah, the list that comes after it.
That's right. So if it's not on the list, it doesn't apply, because otherwise it could be a tuna sandwich. They could just add shit anytime they want, and law has to be very precise. This is what a lot of people don't understand. It's a very, very precise language, and most people get hung up on interpreting that language where it's not actually interpreted. It's very clear. It means exactly what it says it means. For greater certainty, it is the internal waters of Canada and the territorial seas of Canada. Nothing more. And that is right out of the Interpretation Act, Section 31 or 35(1). And right after that, I understand the usage of the word includes effectively excludes all things not specifically stated. Otherwise, it would include a tuna sandwich in the back of my fridge, which is actually what it says on my document. To rightful landowners of the geographical landmass called Canada are the Indigenous, and the Indigenous means you were born here. Doesn't mean you were the first people here. Talk about common law and end it with notice to principal is notice to agent. And then the next bit of this is basically saying that this is not written by a fiction. This is not a joinder to a fiction. This is written by flesh and blood human being living under common law, and here's how to deal with it. Any parties that have a dispute with any of the points I presented are welcome to enter into discourse and negotiation with me to the ends of perfecting my understanding. Giving them the opportunity to say, no, you're wrong, because I could be. I know I'm not, but I could be. A blanket denial will be insufficient grounds to dispute the whole of this document, as the points are vast and varied and will require specific answers. In the absence of a proper dispute, this document will be held as true and lawful and binding on all parties that may have interest in this matter. So here's what I understand. Here's my comprehension. Here's what I stand under. Tell me where I'm wrong. That's what the notice of understanding essentially is. This is what I found. This is the research that I've done. Here's what I've located. What part of this is wrong? But you have to do it in a certain way. You have to do it in a way that is correct. You have to answer to this in a way that is correct. Because you can't just go, well, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. Bugger off. Doesn't mean anything. Because I don't know what I did wrong. I don't know what parts are incorrect here. I'm looking to improve my standing, whether it's under or over, doesn't matter. I'm looking to improve my standing in this information. So I'm basically asking them for help, essentially. But I'm doing it in such a way that if they refuse to help, then they've agreed to what I put in the document. And that's the point of this.
I don't know if you saw that there. John Crystal's just posted.
No, it's
a corner piece of what I believe is the birth certificate for Alaska.
Oh.
What she's pointing out in part of the colouring, it says Pacific banknote, but underneath that, she also posted the reverse side of it that also says in a stamp, red ink stamp, not to be used for identification purposes.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it says not to be used for certification purposes. And this was on it's basically on an old certificate that they voided.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I do recall when we were going over this in the World Freeman Society years ago that the folks in England actually, they looked at their old their birth certificates, and it says right on it, not for identification purposes. And I just wanted to verify. If I could get a photograph or a scan of one of those documents, that would help. The banknote paper that the certificate is printed on, yes, it's all there. I mean, the Canadian one says Canadian Banknote Company. So yeah, it's definitely, it's not identification. That's pretty clear. So yeah, what am I going to do with this? What I would suggest is anybody who is interested in digging up or generating or crafting, which is actually the proper term, notice of understanding and a claim of right, that just do it the way you believe it should be done. Do it in a way that makes sense to you first. And if you'd like some feedback, leave your personal details out of it. I mean, you can just put dots in or asterisks or whatever, name, birth dates, or any personal information. But post it in the room, and we'll have a look at it. Let everybody see it so that we can all learn from this. And we'll go over them. We'll go over the points, and we'll look at each of these points. If there's any that aren't really clear, we can discuss it. We can have a look and see how we can improve. Because I know I like my document, but I know it can be improved. And the more people that I get working on this, the better comprehension of the whole process I go through, and the easier it is for me to teach and show other people how to do this. So don't be afraid of sharing.
John, do you think for those people that haven't actually created a notice of understanding and claim of right, would you suggest that maybe they look that up and have a look at what other people have potentially done, and maybe base theirs on the structure of what other people have done? And I don't mean directly copy, because some of them are awful. Some of them are really bad. Yeah, they said what they wanted to say, but realistically, it just does not hold up. Doesn't hold water. So, maybe if you want to do a search, find something that somebody else has also commented on, preferably lots of other people, how well structured that one might be, and then maybe base yours on that one and go from there. But don't do a direct copy. This is your understanding. This is your claim of right. It's not somebody else's.
Oh, yeah, definitely do not cut and paste. I mean, sometimes a sentence comes out and there's just no way to word it better. And in that situation, okay, not a problem. But if you don't know what that means, if you can't defend it, don't cut and paste it. I know there's at least one, possibly two, that I've written out there somewhere on the net, floating around, that have deliberate errors in them. And I put the errors in deliberately to see who was paying attention. And they were for study purposes only. So just because it comes off the net doesn't mean it's right. You have to know what those statements mean, and you have to be able to explain them clearly. If you can't explain it to a 4-year-old, take it out, because you're not going to be able to get away with it. Somebody's going to find it, and they're going to make a mockery of your document. It's going to happen. It's happened in the past. Now, when I get
Judges are very good at doing that in court as well, John, aren't they?
Oh yes.
Certain questions relating to things that you may have put in documents, and they know within seconds whether you understand what the hell it was you wrote.
That's right. And I had a very in-your-face example of that. It had nothing to do with law or documents or anything. It was when I was before I got my tool and die, when I was a production worker for the company making dental equipment. I would work all day, do my job, have like 600 of these parts sitting on a tray. And the supervisor, who was constantly blowing my mind, he would walk up, scan the tray, and immediately pick out the one that was not right. within seconds. And sometimes the difference was like the thickness of a hair. And every single time he would grab the one that's not right. And judges do this too. They're so good at it. So make sure that your documents are truthful, they're honest. They don't have to be big, flowery words. They don't have to be 11 pages long. Like I mentioned before, that fella on Vancouver Island who was a subsistence hunter, basically his document says, I looked through your law, I didn't see the word love, truth, or honesty, therefore it can't be my law. And that was it. That was his entire notice of understanding. And it worked. It was sufficient because it was honest. It was from him, from his heart. And he could defend it. And there was, something that simple, you can't really take it apart. You can't cause a problem with it. When I write a document...
And that's what I was getting at before by saying preferably keep it as short and as concise as possible. The more you write, the more you're likely to trip yourself up than to, confirm a point. And that particular sentence that you just repeated was as simple as it got and said everything it needed to say. And, attached to the back of it was a fee schedule. And that was it.
Pretty much.
The fee schedule said what it needed to say, and the front said what it needed to say.
Yep.
And you could create a 5 or a 7, or in your case, you've got 11 pages. And that's really concise. It's probably one of the things that I think you're bringing out as to why it can be improved, because you could probably bring it down to 4 pages.
Well, the reason why mine is 11 pages and it's so detailed is because it's a teaching document. When I hand this to a cop, or a judge or a lawyer or a public official, when they get done reading it, they know where the problems are. Okay. The other document was basically just, look, leave me alone. I don't care about teaching you anything. I don't give a shit. Just leave me alone. My document is intended to open eyes. And when I hand this to a cop, like that fella from Saskatchewan, I'm sure when he read through it and he couldn't find any problems with it, he went and looked up some of those things and found some stuff that he was not happy about. And that's why my document is so complicated. Because I want to use it to affect change. Now, if I need... And
that's why I mentioned too that people, if you're going to look up on the internet, then base yours on maybe what that is. Don't do a copy and paste, because this is supposed to be your document for your reasoning, not somebody else's. And as John's just explained, his is wonderful in many, many respects, but it's not necessarily what you want to do, because there's stuff in there that you need to know about. So yes, it's a teaching document, but both John and I might well be able to if somebody points a paragraph out, we can say, oh yeah, we know what that means. This. But if a cop turns around, okay, well, I don't know what this means. What's this? And points it to you, and you say, oh shit, I have no idea what that really means, then you're in trouble.
That's right. So if
why I mentioned that.
If you're crafting a functional working document for general use, write it from your heart. Write it from your truth. And I go into, like I've said a couple of times already, I go into great detail to open eyes. And it's not necessary. It's probably not as effective as one that is simple, basic, couple of sentences straight from your heart. But that wasn't the purpose of this document. That wasn't the point that I was trying to make with this. Now, if I need to have a functional, simple, easy document, I can pull one off in 10 minutes. It's easy to do once you get the detail down and you understand it. But even if you're writing this, the first one, you want a simple, basic, leave me alone document, write it from your heart, but take your time. Know what's in your heart. Most people don't. Most people think they do, I learned this doing my own internal work and my own journey of discovery within myself, is that prior to embarking on this and learning what I have learned, what was in my heart was not right. It was biased because of the system, because of the control system that I'd lived under for, at that point, the better part of 45 years. And understand that you're going to be biased by that. There's going to be things in there, in your heart, which are put there from external sources. And when you write your document, be aware they're there. Everyone has them. And they will cause you issues. It's very similar to the cave analogy, where the people are raised in a cave, all they see is shadows going by all the time, and they don't realize the door's open and the shadows are nothing but finger puppets. But they're afraid of the shadows anyway, and they don't leave the cave. This is in your heart. These things are in your heart. And until you find them, until you look for them, you're not going to know they're there. And until you accept that they are there, you're not even going to see them. So assume that you have embedded control systems in your heart, and that the things you think are coming from your heart, at least in part, are colored by that control system. Question that before you write your document, and dig through that honestly and completely before you try to take this on, because if you don't, one of those things is going to come up and it's going to cause you no end of grief.
And that's why I mentioned, John, you know, if you're going to look for, find one that's got some good comments, and maybe use the good stuff that you can see within it, but make it your own. Comprehend exactly what's being used, the sentences, the verbiage, and so on. Because, as I've mentioned as well, there are some really bad ones out there, and those have been created because of what John says, the colouring of your previous existence, and the anger and the frustrations and other things that you have felt and now feel more because you're finding out things that you didn't believe and now realising do colour your attitude at that point. Yep. So some of those notices are, real issues. And we've said the same with videos, YouTube videos, where people interact with cops. It completely goes sideways because they were coloured in their attitudes towards the cops.
Yeah, I think
and
Carl
didn't operate in the right way.
I don't know if you were involved with the WFS at the time, but perhaps you remember some of the members. Awesome, nice people, beautiful people. I'd party with them any time. I'd help them out. All they have to do is ask. But they got hung up on money. And
yes,
they didn't recognize within themselves that they weren't doing the process to extricate themselves from the system. They were doing the process so that they could benefit from the system. And this is this is the point that I'm trying to make about search your heart, make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, and be aware that you're going to be colored. Some of the people, they would do their claim of right and their notice of understanding, and they would claim all sorts of shit based on they're now going to be the controllers, rather than simply stepping out of the system, living your life as an honest and honorable man. That it's that subtle little difference, and it's one or two little things within their heart that they didn't explore, they didn't question within their own understanding, within their own way of life, that caused them to have immense problems. And some of them went to jail for it. Some of them, they tried to take something that wasn't theirs to take, rather than recover what is theirs to take. And that they got beaten, they went to jail. huge amount of problems. And so that's why I brought this up.
I was around at the time, so I was around at the time and was fully aware of all of those people, and did as much as I possibly could too to force, not even force, but to make them realise that they had written things or put things in such a way that wasn't really beneficial, and to make them see and make that changeover and that click to what they should really be seeing, rather than what ended up taking place. But it didn't really change much with some of them. They were kind of too set, and they were done.
Yeah. And the whole point of the process is to basically tell the babysitter, thank you, I'm now an adult. I don't need to be babysat anymore. I will be responsible for myself. And, we brought this up the very, very first show. The whole basis of this is about personal responsibility. And a big part of that is knowing who you are. And a big part of that is knowing where you've been controlled. What little things have you been holding on to that really shouldn't be there? Greed, power struggles, control issues. There's a whole bunch of them. And I'm not immune to any of it. I went through the same thing myself. Fortunately, I had a mentor who showed me where to look, showed me what to look for. And in a way, it was good. In another way, it was bad because I missed a bunch of stuff. And it took me a couple of years of more reflection to find it. So I'm taking a slightly different tack, simply saying there's stuff in there that's going to cause issues. Go look for it. Honestly. So I'm going to sanitize this document. Basically, just take out the personal stuff. But I will post this in the room so that folks can download it and they can look through it. Use it as a teaching document. Please don't just cut and paste, because that won't work. Trust me, it doesn't work. On a rare occasion, yes, that sentence can't be written any better. But unless you can back it up, unless you are willing to put it on the line, don't use it. Because if you do use this process, not everyone will get questioned about it, but they will test you. And I went looking for the testing, which is, I put it out there. I went to the cop. I talked to the CSIS agents, and I said, look, here it is. Tell me where I'm wrong. And I brought it to them rather than having them bring it to me going, look, I found this, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and you're going to answer for this. And I went about it in a different way. So my testing was, I guess, a little gentler than a lot. But some of the folks who didn't search their heart, didn't find those little black spots, they got smacked hard. So be aware, this is incredibly powerful, but it also can backfire if you're not doing it right. So on that note, I think we're going to get out of here. We're running a little late today, but that's okay. I kind of run off at the mouth when I get talking about this stuff because I'm very passionate about it.
I didn't know if you'd noticed, John.
I do tend to repeat myself, but usually only the important stuff.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, guys. Had a few more people in the chat. It was nice to see you in there. And I hope to have some more. Clive, you wanted to bring something up?
I think
Hi. Thank you, John and Carl. This is what I would say, just as a quickie. I looked at as much of your acts as I could, and found that it was too much, and I did not understand any of it. Therefore, it is not my law.
Yeah, I mean that's short and sweet, but it doesn't really have the bite.
No. And actually, what word did you use there, Clive? Just go back over it again. And what word did you use?
Where? I used understand.
Correct.
I did not understand. No, I don't stand under it.
That's right, but you didn't give a reason.
No, but it's exactly. It's an undefined word.
Yep. You didn't give a reason. You see, the original one where it says, I looked through your law and I couldn't find the words love, honesty, or truth. Therefore, it can't be my law. Because this guy lives under love, honesty, and truth, right?
Yeah.
And nobody can say that living under love, honesty, and truth is illegal. It's a bad way to live, right?
And it was still shorter than the one I've just done.
Short and sweet, but it had big teeth.
Yep.
So that's the difference.
Okay, that's the only comment.
Okay. Okay, folks, this went directly to YouTube, so the archive will be up in probably less than a half an hour instead of 3 days or 4 days like it was last week. Sorry about that. It was a crazy week. It was just nuts.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of looking at another way around so that we can do the video, live stream video, and I can get documents up on the screen and we can highlight and go over things. I kind of have to practice a little bit because that's a tremendous amount of work and talk to, because I'm going to be really busy doing that. So I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's something I'm looking at. We've had pretty good response just from the audio. So if it turns out to be a whole lot of work, at least we won't be moving backwards. But thanks everybody. I enjoy talking to you about this stuff. I hope I wasn't too repetitive. I know I do get repetitive once in a while, but it's because I feel really strongly about it.
Well, we're also belaboring the point as well.
We have to.
We believe is functionally required in this process because. Like we've just mentioned, even creating a document, you're going to put your signature to that, and you have to know what every single word really, or phrase or sentence actually means. So again, this is why we've stressed it over and over again, and why we want to teach you that process. Because if we don't teach you that process, and you really want to proceed, and stand in your own power and be, a grown up and responsible, then we don't want you to get into trouble either. That's right.
If this seems beyond you at the time, I don't want to insult anybody, but if you're looking at this and you're going, oh, it's too much, that's fine. Just let it sit. It will come clear, because the concepts, the underlying concepts behind this is actually really simple. It gets complicated when you're bridging between the concept and the implementation. But once you have the concepts in your head, start to live by them, and the rest of it will fall into place. So on that note, we're going to say goodbye, and I'll have the document up in the chat probably within the hour, and the archive will be up again probably within the hour. So we'll see you all next week. Have a great day, folks.
Yeah,
good night,
thanks for joining us, everybody, and always a pleasure. And I know you're producing as well as co-hosting, so much appreciated. Talk to everybody next week, and I'm sure I'll speak to you in the meantime. Some of you we already know. So yeah, have a good week, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye all.
Cheers, Joel.